Imagine walking alone through a dense, silent forest. Tall pines rising like pillars, moss swallowing the sound of your steps, morning fog weaving between the branches. And then, through the shifting haze, a structure emerges, elevated, weathered, hidden for centuries. A tower unlike anything you've seen. Not European, not colonial, something older, purposeful. A construction that shouldn't exist, but does. For generations, stories drifted about mysterious wooden structures deep in North America's forests. Platforms perched high above the ground, scaffold-like frames intertwined with living trees, and fortified shelters balanced on ridges where the horizon opened like a map. Outsiders dismissed them as hunting perches or random remains. But they were far more than that. These were lookout shelters, engineered vantage points built with astonishing precision by Native American communities who understood land, height, wind, and distance in ways that modern builders too often overlook. They weren't monuments. They weren't decoration. They were the eyes of entire regions. From up there, hunters tracked migrating herds, scouts watched for distant movement, and messengers signaled across valleys using light, fire, or reflective surfaces. These towers formed networks, linking forests, plains, and river corridors into systems of communication that stretched far beyond what most imagine. And they weren't exposed platforms. Many included sheltered chambers, weather covers, windbreak structures, and surfaces shaped for protection, rest, and observation. This episode takes you inside those towers, how they were built, where they were placed, how they functioned, and why they were essential to survival. These structures weren't random constructions lost in the woods. They were strategic, deliberate, and deeply connected to the land they guarded. If uncovering forgotten engineering like this matters to you, then don't just watch. Subscribe, hit the bell, and stay with this channel as we reveal the forest sentinels that once watched over entire nations. Step into the forests of North America centuries ago, and the first impression is overwhelming. Towering trees, thick canopies, and a silence that hides more than it reveals. Yet in these dense landscapes stood something unexpected. Elevated structures rising above the forest floor, crafted with intent and positioned with remarkable accuracy. These weren't built to impress, they were built to see. To most modern eyes, the remains of these forest towers appear almost mythical. Weathered wood, angled supports, and woven branches blend into the surrounding trees as if the forest has reclaimed them. But their original purpose was unmistakable. These towers acted as sentinels, granting views that pierced through miles of woodland, a vantage point no ground path could provide. For centuries, many assumed these elevated structures were simple hunting stands or makeshift perches. But the truth runs deeper. Their construction reveals a knowledge of height, stability, and long-range observation that challenges every assumption about so-called primitive engineering. Builders selected trees with natural strength, reinforced them with interlocked beams, and used angled supports that allowed the structures to endure storms, snow load, and seasonal expansion of wood. And these towers were more than open platforms. Many contained enclosed spaces, small shelters where scouts, hunters, and guardians could rest, observe, and remain protected from cold rain, icy winds, or prowling animals. These weren't one-purpose structures. They were living stations, places where someone might spend a night, monitor an entire valley, or relay information back to the community. Hidden deep in forests, elevated above danger, and crafted from materials that blended seamlessly into the land, these towers served as the earliest surveillance posts across vast territories. They were not merely structures in the forest. They were the forest's watchful eyes. The first thing an outsider might assume when seeing a reconstructed forest tower is that it was a simple structure. Logs stacked, branches tied, something built quickly without deeper planning. But the engineering behind these lookout shelters proves otherwise. Every beam, every angle, every lash was placed with purpose. The process began long before construction. Builders walked the land, reading wind corridors, tree growth patterns, soil firmness, and natural sightlines. They selected trees with the right trunk density and root stability, then shaped the structure around them. Some towers stood independently. Others were anchored directly into living trees, using the trunk as a central pillar. The surrounding branches weren't obstacles, they were structural allies. Reinforced crossbeams were woven between natural limbs to build platforms capable of supporting multiple occupants. Material choice was equally deliberate. Builders gathered straight poles from species known for flexibility and endurance. Wood that bent instead of snapped. Bark strips that tightened as they dried, creating lashings as strong as rope. Panels of woven branches provided walls or partial coverings that shielded occupants from wind without adding excessive weight. Height wasn't chosen at random. Towers were positioned where ridges opened wide views, where valleys funneled movement, or where distant smoke trails could be spotted long before they reached a village. Even the angle of morning and evening light mattered. A tower placed incorrectly could lose visibility for hours each day. Wind behavior shaped design more than anything. Towers needed enough elevation to see, but not so much that a strong gust could threaten the structure. Builders compensated with diagonal braces, three-point anchoring, and strategic placement among clustered trees that naturally broke high winds. This wasn't rough construction. Phased architecture shaped by the wild, crafted by those who knew the forest's behavior down to its smallest shift. An elevated tower wasn't just a place to stand and scan the horizon. It was a functional shelter, built for long hours, sometimes long nights, of observation. Life inside these lookout structures reveals how deeply they were woven into daily survival, communication, and territorial awareness. Step inside a reconstructed tower, and you understand immediately. This was no open platform exposed to the weather. Many included partial or full coverings crafted from bark sheets, woven mats, or layered branches that blocked rain and softened the wind. The height alone kept occupants safe from prowling animals, but the enclosed design protected them from sudden storms or bitter cold. A scout could remain at their post through shifting weather without losing visibility. Daily routines were shaped by the tower's purpose. A lookout monitored game movement in the early morning, when herds crossed valleys or rivers. They watched ridgelines at dusk, when distant silhouettes revealed approaching travelers. Some towers stored small caches, dried meat, water, extra coverings, so a scout could remain in place without descending every few hours. In certain regions, small fire pits built from stone fragments allowed controlled smoke signals without igniting surrounding wood. Communication was one of the tower's most important functions. A single signal, reflected sunlight, a flicker of flame, a drifting column of smoke, could alert nearby camps or coordinate hunting parties miles apart. Entire regions relied on these towers as nodes in a far-reaching network. Scouts could monitor river traffic, track migrating game herds, or signal danger long before it reached the community. These elevated shelters were not passive watchposts. They were strategic workplaces, places where decisions were made, warnings were issued, and survival often depended on the eyes stationed above the forest floor. In every sense, these towers were living extensions of the community's awareness. A forest tower was far more than an elevated shelter. It was a position of authority, a point from which entire landscapes could be read long before dangers or opportunities reached the community below. From these heights, the world unfolded differently. Rivers became moving lines, game trails formed patterns, and distant valleys revealed signals that would be invisible on the ground. Lookouts stationed in these towers could detect approaching groups long before footsteps reached the trees. The slightest break in a tree line, an unusual dust plume, the glint of movement along a ridge, signs that would vanish at ground level were unmistakable from above. For communities living in regions where conflict was a possibility, this early detection was essential. A warning sent early gave families time to relocate, hunters time to regroup, and leaders time to respond without panic. These towers were equally vital for tracking migrating game. Herds could shift direction with weather changes, river levels, or disturbances farther north. A single lookout, elevated above the canopy, could spot movement across multiple valleys and relay that information through signals or runners. Hunting parties depended on this early knowledge. It could mean the difference between a successful season and a dangerous shortage. In fire-prone regions, towers served another purpose: identifying smoke long before flames reached nearby camps. Scouts learned to read the color, height, and spread of distant smoke columns, recognizing whether it belonged to a controlled burn, a lightning strike, or something more threatening. The true brilliance appeared when towers operated as a network. Each post watched over its own section of land, but together they formed an interconnected system stretching across miles. A signal from one tower could leap to the next, then the next, moving faster than any traveler could run. These were not isolated constructions. They were coordinated guardians, silent overseers of forests, valleys, and distant horizons. Today, only fragments remain of the towers that once watched over vast stretches of forest. A few angled posts rising from the undergrowth, a circle of stones where support once stood, a tree that bears the faint, unnatural scarring of beams once lashed into place. Time has softened their presence, but not their importance. These remains offer a quiet window into the resilience and innovation of the people who built them. Archaeologists studying these structures often find more than physical evidence. Soil layers reveal how long a tower stood. Burn patterns indicate points of signaling or controlled fires. Growth rings in nearby trees tell stories about seasonal use, abandonment, or rebuilding efforts. Every piece contributes to a clearer picture of how these lookouts functioned in a wider landscape of settlement, hunting grounds, and travel routes. Yet the most valuable insights come from indigenous communities who preserve the knowledge connected to these towers. Oral histories, traditional land use practices, and regional architectural methods help researchers understand how and why these structures were built. In many areas, tribal preservation teams work alongside archaeologists, ensuring that the rediscovery of these towers respects both cultural meaning and historical accuracy. In recent years, renewed attention has brought these forest sentinels back to public awareness. Some regions have begun reconstructing towers based on archaeological evidence and indigenous guidance, not as tourist attractions, but as educational tools, living reminders of a sophisticated system of surveillance, communication, and forest management. The relevance extends beyond heritage. Modern fire watch towers, wildlife monitoring platforms, and forest observation posts echo the same principles used centuries ago: elevation, visibility, strategic placement, and environmental awareness. Ancient towers weren't relics of a forgotten past. They were well-designed tools, built for longevity, safety, and informed decision-making. Across the forests of North America, their echoes still rise quietly through the trees. Raising any structure in the middle of a dense forest is difficult. Raising one high above the canopy with enough strength to endure storms, predators, and the shifting weight of seasons demanded a level of engineering that went far beyond simple construction. These towers weren't just elevated platforms. They were feats of balance, tension, weight distribution, and natural reinforcement. Builders first had to confront the forest's greatest challenge: instability. The forest floor shifts with moisture, roots, and decay, making long-lasting foundations difficult. Native American builders solved this the elegant way, by integrating the tower directly into living trees or embedding supports where natural root networks strengthened the ground. A living tree could sway, absorb wind pressure, and distribute stress through its trunk and root system, giving the tower a built-in anchor that no static post could match. Height required more than stacking poles. It demanded a system of interlocked supports arranged to counter vertical and lateral forces. Builders used diagonal bracing to prevent swaying, crossbeams to distribute weight, and lashings that tightened naturally as the weather dried the fibers. This created a structure that behaved almost like a ship's mast, flexible enough to survive strong winds, yet rigid enough to keep its platform stable. Wind engineering was critical. Towers placed on ridgelines needed to break gusts without collapsing. Those nestled among clustered trees relied on the forest itself to reduce pressure. Some towers tapered toward the top, reducing drag and preventing high-level oscillation. Finally, elevation wasn't achieved all at once. Many towers were built in stages, rising a little higher each season as the community tested their stability, reinforced joints, and expanded the platform. This slow-building approach wasn't hesitation, it was precision. Against all expectations, these structures didn't fight the forest. They learned to move with it. A forest tower was never meant to stand out. Its strength came from being seen only by the people who built it. Hidden among dense branches and shadowed ridgelines, these lookout shelters were designed not as landmarks, but as quiet extensions of the forest itself. Their power came from silence, concealment, and an understanding of how sound and sight behave in wooded terrain. Builders constructed them with materials that matched the surroundings. Weather-darkened wood, bark coverings, and woven branches allowed the towers to disappear from a distance. Even at close range, many blended seamlessly with surrounding trees, making it nearly impossible for an outsider to distinguish a lookout from natural growth. This camouflage wasn't accidental. It was strategic protection. A revealed tower could be targeted. A hidden one could watch without ever being seen. Acoustics played an equally important role. Forests can distort sound, carrying it far or swallowing it unexpectedly. Builders placed towers where the land naturally funneled noise, on slight rises where even soft footsteps traveled upward, or near breaks in the trees where wind carried distant movement. Lookouts learned to read faint signs, a snapped branch echoing off a rock wall, the shift of birds reacting to something unseen, or the rhythm of approaching travelers revealed through the forest's own responses. Inside the towers, silence was essential. Floors were layered to reduce creaks. Entry points were narrow to prevent unnecessary noise. Scouts moved carefully, observing without announcing their presence. Elevated height gave them a unique advantage. They could hear and see without disturbing the ground-level environment. These lookouts were not only watch stations, they were stealth positions. Their effectiveness depended on staying invisible while reading every subtle change in the world below. A tower didn't declare itself. Unchanged, observed, and revealed the land in ways impossible at ground level. A single tower could change the fate of a community. But a network of towers, linked across valleys, hills, and deep forest corridors, created something far more powerful. A communication system that stretched over distances no voice, runner, or drum could match. These lookout shelters weren't isolated posts. Many operated as part of a coordinated chain, designed to pass information faster than any traveler could move through rugged terrain. The principle was simple. Height created visibility, and visibility created connection. A lookout perched above the canopy could see not just the land, but the glow of another tower miles away. In clear conditions, a spark of reflected light, the rising curl of a controlled smoke signal, or a flicker of flame after dusk could travel astonishing distances. Each tower acted as both receiver and messenger, interpreting signals and relaying them within moments. Different regions developed their own systems. In heavily forested zones, scouts used narrow openings in the canopy to send short, precise smoke signals. In plateau regions, where open views stretched for miles, reflected sunlight from polished stone or shell fragments became a daytime equivalent of fire. Along river valleys, where mist often settled, scouts used elevated torches to cut through low visibility, sending sharp bursts of light up and down the waterways. The strength of these networks wasn't only technical, it was strategic. If game herds shifted, the news traveled quickly. If a distant ridge showed unfamiliar movement, lookouts alerted others long before trouble reached the village. If weather patterns hinted at dangerous storms or changing migration paths, the towers communicated it across the region. These signals weren't random flickers lost in the wilderness. They were part of an intentional, coordinated system that turned vast landscapes into connected territories. Through these towers, information moved not just across space, but across entire seasons of survival. A forest tower was never a static monument. It lived through seasons, storms, and shifting needs. Unlike stone fortifications that stand unchanged for centuries, these lookout shelters were designed to grow, adjust, and, when the time came, be rebuilt entirely. Their strength came from this cycle of renewal, not permanence. Seasonal change dictated everything. As winter approached, lookouts reinforced the structure with fresh lashings tightened by the cold air. Extra windbreak panels were added, crafted from bark sheets or woven mats, protecting scouts from icy gusts sweeping across ridgelines. Snow accumulation was monitored constantly. Too much weight on the platform meant reinforcing or clearing it before it threatened stability. Spring brought a different set of tasks. Meltwater softened the forest floor, testing foundations and anchoring points. Scouts inspected support posts to ensure they hadn't shifted, then repaired or replaced weakened sections with poles harvested from new seasonal growth. Lashings were refreshed, not because they always failed, but because maintenance was part of the tower's rhythm. Summer often marked expansion. As travelers moved, game shifted, or territorial needs changed, communities rebuilt sections of the tower to improve visibility or extend height. Some towers grew taller year by year, rising alongside the surrounding forest. Others were relocated entirely when environmental changes, like new tree growth or shifted game routes, reduced their effectiveness. Autumn was the season of preparation. Dry weather allowed for major reconstruction, strengthening beams, resealing coverings, and stockpiling materials for the winter scouting cycle. If a tower had served its purpose and a new location offered better vantage, communities dismantled parts of the structure and carried usable elements to the next site. This continuous cycle of building, maintaining, and renewing wasn't a sign of fragility. It was deliberate engineering. Structures kept in peak condition because survival demanded nothing less.